About BYU football extensively on the show, and as I dove into some of the film this year, and as I watched them consistently throughout the year, there's only one conclusion I can really come up with, especially as I go into analyzing the transfer portal and the recruiting class and all that good stuff. Is BYU is the most underrated program in the country. And I can't say enough about how impressive they've been over the past couple years. And even towards the beginning of Sataki's tenure, transitioning BYU from being an independent to the Big 12, which, goes without saying that it's always really difficult to be an independent. I mean, unless you're Notre Dame, but they get they get along just fine. But, when you look at BYU this offseason, their only losses were to Texas Tech. And here's where BYU is at right now. Their entire offseason was about retention, retention, retention. And I think what I appreciate most about BYU's approach is even though they have some heavy donors behind them, they decided, you know what, we know that we have the foundation to this team, but they're being very calculated and very specific in terms of what type of portal guys that they want to bring in, right? Because when I look at the guys that have agreed to return, you have Parker Kingston, you have Tre Alexander, you have Bear Bachmeier, you have Isaiah Glasker, you have Evan Johnson, and Faletau, Satuala, and then the leading Big 12 rusher, LJ Martin. When you have all those dudes coming back, you can't help but feel excited and kind of say to yourself, BYU completely exceeded expectations here. And we knew that going into the year that BYU was a relatively young team. And I knew that there were definitely some concerns with Jake Retzlaff, going to Tulane, but ultimately they figured it out and they did the best that they could. And, even when you kind of look at what BYU even needs this offseason, there's really no big obvious thing that they absolutely need. More than anything, it's really just depth and just making sure that you're more or less kind of replacing guys that either graduated or aren't necessarily quite ready to be on the field yet, usually due to some type of mission trip. But in any event, when you kind of look at who's departing this team, you have McCade Hillstead, who's transferring to Utah State and will probably compete for the starting job there. And then Marcus McKenzie, who's also going to Utah State. And then Max Alford, who decided to follow Jay Hill to Michigan. And, we could talk about the Jay Hill thing for a second. I mean, I've been on record this show a number of times saying how phenomenal of a play caller that I think Jay Hill is. You can definitely tell that he's brought another layer of depth to this defense. And, I can only say good enough things about him, especially, his tenure at Weber State. He knows the Mountain West like the back of his hand. He's recruited, in the state of Utah for, decades now. And, he's really is a really essential reason as to why BYU football is where it's at right now. But they decided to, what in my opinion is a smart move, and promote Kelly Poppinga as their defensive coordinator. And what's good about the Poppinga hire is one thing I appreciate about listening to Poppinga in an interview as well is just how humble he was in terms of talking about how his coaching experience, not only about learning Jay Hill's scheme for the past couple of seasons, but also former BYU coach Bronco Mendenhall, who also I don't think gets enough love in terms of, a lot of coaching circles, in terms of guys who, I think have been really solid coaches. I mean, whether it's BYU, whether it's Virginia or New Mexico, that he's always raised the ceiling of a program anywhere that he's been. And, I think Poppinga is going to kind of mesh sort of Jay Hill's scheme and learn a little bit from Mendenhall and kind of put all that together. So do I think there's necessarily going to be anything super drastic about what BYU is doing defensively in terms of changes? No, not necessarily, because I mean, for the most part, they did everything that they had to do. They retained a lot of guys, but most importantly, they were able to get a really significant commit, 4-star linebacker, former Cal linebacker, Cade Unalave. And, he just signed with the Cougars the other day. And let me tell you, big shout out to Tell the Whole Damn World podcast. They do a phenomenal job at covering all things Cal football. But I've watched this kid in a number of games this year, and let me tell you, he is all over the football field. He is a proven leader. He's physical. He's tough, and I think he really fits the mold of BYU football really well. And I think if you're BYU, definitely try to watch some film on this kid, because I'm telling you, he's going to be an immediate impact player on this defense. I can guarantee you that right now. And not to mention, when you look at this recruiting class as well, they've taken a giant step up from last year, where they were ranked 55th last year, and then this year they are a whopping 26th in terms of their recruiting class right now. 22 total commits, only a handful of transfers, roughly 50% in state, which I really think is a really strong number, kind of given just how much change has kind of gone in terms of NIL and the transfer portal, and just how less you have to rely on in-state recruiting for a lot of these bigger programs, not necessarily BYU, but a lot of the more, nationally recognized programs that people kind of talk about a little bit more. But, there are a couple guys worth mentioning. Obviously, the quarterback of the future for this program is going to be Ryder Lyons, who, committed relatively early throughout the process, but he's a kid that I know Aaron Roderick and Sataki are really, really high on. I mean, definitely the highest ranked quarterback recruit that BYU has seen in a long time, perhaps maybe in history too. So that's something worth looking up. Also, Brock Harris, tight end as well, in-state kid who 4-star recruit, somebody that I wouldn't be surprised if you see him in the and everything going on sooner than later. But you have to be excited about what's going on here. I mean, coming off a 25-21 Pop-Tart Bowl victory versus Georgia Tech, only 2 losses were the Big 12 championship game versus Texas Tech in the beginning of the year versus them as well. You still have Aaron Roderick on your staff. You have Sataki going to his 11th year. You have the continuality between, Jay Hill going to Michigan, and now you have Poppinga, who has learned from essentially everybody, including Mendenhall, including Hill. And you have a Big 12 that is open as ever now. Obviously obviously Texas Tech is the biggest dog, but there's no reason why BYU can't be in that conversation when they, at the moment, have more 4-star kids than Texas Tech has right now. They have 7 4-star kids compared to Texas Tech's only has 5. 14 3-star kids. Only a handful of transfers that they've had to rely on. And I think if you're BYU, that really is the bread and butter. That's really has to be the message is, it's deeper than just playing football. It's the university itself. It's the mission. It's kind of all that put together. And I think that's what makes BYU not only as a program special and kind of what makes them stand out, but that's also what ultimately will be the difference maker in terms of why we're talking about BYU again as a 9, 10, possibly 11 win team again, compared to, some of the other programs that we kind of see who, we know that they're better than just 6 or 7 wins, but we don't necessarily know if we can kind of talk about them in a double digit conversation. But let me know in the comments what you think about BYU. But I absolutely know that this team is definitely trending in the right direction. I think they're the most underrated program in the country. And between the retention that they've had, between a couple guys that they brought in the portal, I can't help but be excited about what's going on with them. And I think everybody in the country needs to be on the lookout for them.